Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Well, today we're going to talk about the fork of GIMP called Glimpse is now on hiatus. This one was a little bit controversial, and I don't remember exactly what we said on it here when it first came around, but it always did seem to come off as, and it has been accused of being possibly more of like a, maybe like a woke brand, that it was forked, and one of their stated goals is to make it more professional and less offensive, because GIMP means, you know, a bad cripple in some areas, even though GIMP is just GNU Image Manipulator Program. It's just an acronym is what it is. And in reality, GIMP itself anymore in the Flatpak, it calls itself in the menu GNU Image Manipulator Program as well in many cases. But at the same time, they're not changing their name because somebody out there finds it offensive. I mean, I can find somebody who's offended at anything one might do. That doesn't mean I'm going to change everything around it. But the Glimpse project was not just that. They actually wanted to work with the UI and make a better, more user-friendly UI. And some people have suggested that maybe GIMP does need help in that area. Some people don't care. I personally don't see any problem with the UI of GIMP, but that's me. I think that that's a very subjective thing, but that is one of the things that they wanted to do. So let's go ahead and first have a look at their website. This is the Glimpse image editor, and their idea, you can see the picture here, looks exactly like GIMP, and in fact, in the first earlier versions, it was exactly GIMP with a different name. They weren't making a whole lot of progress towards it. It's available in a Flatpak and a Snap package, and you could build it for different distributions. We'll go ahead and get to that more in a bit. They said it's more professional. Their only thing, a new name and a new logo. They say a clearer UI and fewer Easter eggs makes an amazing open source package. So really, that's really what they were targeting for. But a lot of the early press was on a less offensive name. They're trying to downplay that now. But if you go back in time 2 years when it first came out, that really was their big selling point. They have tried to distance themselves from that. So it's easier to deploy. I'm not sure what's easier to deploy than GIMP. Lightweight Windows installers can be easily imported into existing centralized software management tools. We manage our Linux packaging updates on FlatHub and Snap Store. You also get the latest security updates and bug fixes. More usable. So we've added keyboard shortcuts and configuration settings from Photo GIMP, make transition from more expensive commercial image software easier. That's one thing that GIMP does do, is it uses different keyboard shortcuts. However, they provide a very good way to get in there and edit those, so you can go ahead and do that. Cooperating, not competing. This is something that they've always done really well. They always have donated to the GIMP project. They do pass any of their bug fixes and stuff. They will pass those back to GIMP. They're not out there saying, don't use GIMP, use us instead. They just wanted to be an alternative, is really what they were doing. They have donated, I think, $750 in their small project that hasn't even had a full official first release to the GIMP project, and that's a good thing. And even now, as on hiatus, they're saying, please redirect the donations you gave to us directly to GIMP, so that GIMP is made better. When we are able to come back, then we can have a better program to work on. And so now they're also working on Glimpse NX, so a lightweight newcomer. So probably very much like, what is that, Photoshop? Is it Elements, I think? Just a very simple version. So that's really what their goal was. They do have the code of conducts, which are definitely offensive to some people. Using welcome and inclusive language, it does read like a bunch of woke nonsense. And so the elements that they have said, that people have said against it, saying it's just a bunch of, woke mad people, could very well have with it some credibility, with the fact that they are utilizing the fairly controversial code of conduct. So that's kind of what their goals are. And that's really all they have. They have their basic information, their download page, they have posts and things. Well, they just announced the project on hiatus. Now, in this, there were a couple different factors. It wasn't just that nobody liked it. However, the fact that they started just by saying, hey, we want to be a more professional one because we're using a different name, did not exactly garner a lot of support. The reality is the project did, we'll go through the newsletter itself, but the reality is that the project did close down because there just weren't any people to help with it. A lot of this might be you start excluding people. You start using controversial codes of conduct in the Linux world. You start basically taking a very well-known and popular program and just changing its name. You tend to not get as much support. That really is the reason they're closing down, but that's not all of the reason. There was one developer behind it that really did most of the work, and that was Bobby Moss. He did have a statement here, the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. There was some information in there, but the reality is all they're saying is just the generalities that this was hard on everybody, and because of that, they couldn't find people to help. That may or may not have been the case. To me, if a lot of people are getting paid to not work, you have more things to do on fun projects. But hey, that's neither here nor there. The biggest factor, as I read through this newsletter, was actually had more to do with the work of Bobby Moss. So his full-time day job obviously is the most important to maintain. And his bosses were aware of the project and were okay with him working on it as long as it wasn't a massive load. And at some point in time, he had to start doing a lot of development. He had to start doing a lot of just a lot of the other general maintenance stuff. The things that even here on Switch to Linux, I don't always have time to do. Answer all the emails, moderate all the comments, all this type of stuff. You know, I completely understand because that's sometimes where I live. I don't always have time to check in on everything and to keep things going. So, you know, maybe it's time I start hiring help around here. I don't know. But anyway, he had that going on, but there was actually another factor, and that is a new policy went into effect where he worked, and that required you to actually have some legal write-offs on any third-party projects. Now, I personally am against that type of thing on a workplace level. As long as you're able to go in there and show up and do your work, you should be able to do whatever you want to do on the side. It shouldn't matter. And that really is probably the biggest impact to this because he originally stepped away for a short period of time just to get all those bases covered. So it says down here, employer had been keeping close eye on participation in the GIMP project since it began, had started to raise concerns that if I took on many more responsibilities within the project, it might begin to impact my performance on the day job. That I completely understand. When your hobby starts getting in the way of your day job, that is indeed a problem. But he says, in addition, there had been some changes in company policy that required me to seek legal approval and formally confirm that there had not been any conflicts of interests. That's the point where it starts becoming a little bit of nonsense. Now, maybe nonsense. I can understand in some places making sure there's no conflicts of interest. If you're working for a company selling a clothing line and you start in a side gig e-commerce clothing line, there could indeed be some conflicts of interest. If you open up a small business, it is a direct competitor to your employer. Completely understand that. And that's not really what's clear here. But nevertheless, he did have to take time to seek legal counsel and figure this out. But in the middle of this, he comes back to find the project's a mess. There's nobody around to help. And at this point in time, he's like, all right, it's just not worth the time. So they are closing all their funding channels. They did have a comment here. If you are using Glimps, if you're the Flatpak or the Snap, since they are sandboxed from the system, you can still use those. You will not get features, updates, and bug fixes. But security-wise, you should be okay to stay on those. If you are inside of, if you're on some custom build that's not sandboxed, he says you might want to just go ahead and switch back to GIMP for the time being. They are archiving the GitHub repositories and setting things on monitor only to avoid trolling. And that's a good thing to do. And really, they're not closing everything down. They're just saying, hey, right now we don't have the people to work on it. So with that in mind, This is one of those things that can happen inside of Linux applications, FOSS applications. If there's not enough people around to help with some of the circumstances, then projects can get closed down because there's too many administrative things behind the scenes to cover before you can get to doing any of the work. So if the Glimpse project is something that's critically important to you and you're like, we got to get rid of that GIMP and go on with Glimpse instead, then you might need to gather together a bunch of people that can come in and take off this. Really, their biggest concern was people to not coding stuff as much. It was people to monitor the channels, to triage the bug reports, basically to just do some administrative work here and there to make sure that things are going in line with the way that they are going. So with that in mind, the Glimpse project is going on hiatus. Some people might say it's because they were nothing but a crazy woke project anyway. Reading through all this, I don't really think that's necessarily the case, although there are definitely and certainly some elements therein. So that's worthy of consideration as well. But nevertheless, if you are on Glimpse, you should, if you're using it like a system-wide install, something generic, then you should probably go back to GIMP. And if you are using the Snap or the Flatpak, as long as it's working for you, they said there's no real reason to change. And also it does say in here that if you are already a financial supporter of the Glimpse project, they say please redirect that over to GIMP instead so that GIMP will be made better when they are able to come back from their hiatus. So hopefully this has been a help to you. Let me know in the comments down below if you have tried Glimpse or if you've even heard of it. I know I talked about it briefly a couple years ago when it was new, so I can't remember what I said about it. That was BC. That would be before Corona. So with that being in mind, I don't remember much from back then. So who knows whatever got said. But anyway, there is an update on that project. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux. Thank you for watching this video from Switched to Linux. This channel would not be possible without the backing of the program supporters scrolling on the screen now. You can be a supporter at Patreon at patreon.com/TOMM or at thinklifemedia.com. I also want to thank the open source community who creates such excellent software that makes producing this show possible. Please remember to support your software communities. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.